First of all, how do I personally define sustainability in a day and age where the term is very popular, and as a result, I wouldn't say overused, because I welcome the popularity of sustainability. And if this is something that's suddenly trendy, then I believe the world can benefit from that on a human level, on an environmental level, for people to ponder about sustainability, to bring it into people's awareness, into their consciousness, in whichever capacity, form, or way they reflect on that. I welcome it. And by building homes that ensure to protect humans and nature, we assume that we create in a sustainable manner. And I believe these things do not need to be mutually exclusive, because often when we build, it's at the detriment of nature. But I believe we can build in ways that integrate into nature rather than cause havoc. So to assure that we protect nature, we must work with materials that are available in infinite supply and do not disrupt or deplete nature. We notice that wherever we look on the African continent, the shapes replicate nature, and they also point into often constellations and the sky, because we know that everywhere on the African continent, spirituality is an integral part of life. I say that to invite us to contextualize and consider the constellations in the sky whilst building, because the firmament and the celestial bodies play a role in the lives of people. Traditionally, they used to play a role. And when we look at ancient Egypt, every pyramid, every temple is aligned and replicates the star constellations. It's of course phenomenal, but I think when we look at the shape, we all must agree, when something is so minimalistic that you can literally take nothing away, it is timeless, because there's no such thing as decor that defines a time period. This is the internal shape. So now this is the Great Wall of Benin. It's supposedly the greatest man-made structure in the world. It's larger than the Great Wall of China. And that was in the Benin kingdom in Nigeria, not in the country Benin, because the borders that we know today were created during the Berlin Conference, and Africa was organized very differently prior to that. So sometimes that's very confusing when we hear Benin. We think of Benin the country, but there is a kingdom in Nigeria that's Benin, or it originally was a kingdom. Why I tap into the concept of regenesis, because I believe when we incorporate an element of philosophy into architecture, we incorporate a feeling, an emotion into it. And I believe some of the greatest architects, they managed to do that so well. When we go to Spain and look at Gaudi, there's a poetic element to it. Or when we look at what's her name? She was a Middle Eastern woman. She died. She was very active in Miami. I forgot her name now. There's always an element of poetry that exudes a feeling, and that is what makes certain type of architecture stand out, because it lingers even after we've left the buildings. So when we introduce and we take balance, we balance each side of the scale, regenesis happens. And balancing each side of the scale means to do exactly what we are intending to do during this class, and give to those that have been impoverished, have been extorted and exploited, and as a result do not have access to adequate housing. And when we create and when we build and we respect all resources, the mineral resource, the environmental resource, the communal resource, and the human resource, then that creates regenesis. And if we manage to weave that into the architecture we create, then we manage to weave in a feeling, a philosophy. So that's in short the philosophy that we wish to weave when we build, and we build, of course, from an idea. We always have the opportunity to weave in an intention. And I don't know how many of you can attest to that. When we set an intention, we become a catalyst for miracles. And that has very little to do with what our personal beliefs, our spiritual beliefs are, but something happens in the universe when we set an intention. So when we look at different shapes, the pictures you see on the left, these are traditional African houses and homes. The picture on the right, that is a 5-star resort that is built predominantly from bamboo and rammed earth. The picture in the center as well. And the other shapes, that's a Middle Eastern architect that was inspired actually by African shapes. So here we can see I superimposed an image of a building of a Maxim hut that was built by local builders onto. Here we see locals weaving from reed, and these reeds are abundantly available in nature. They have a beautiful golden color, and as you can see, the shapes are round and also triangular. So the beauty about soil, especially this is soil from Sierra Leone, is that it comes in beautiful shades of red, based on the minerals that are prevalent in the earth. Sometimes it's an ochre, it's a terracotta, it goes into deep reds. Here we see how it has been traditionally used in Indonesia. That is also the case in Indonesia. They developed so many amazing techniques on how to process bamboo, how to integrate it and use it. It's phenomenal. Here you see it without the entrance being superimposed into it. So while one is in the Middle East and the other pictures on the right and at the bottom are in Africa, we see a similarity in shapes, and we see that these shapes they exude something. Me personally, I feel they exude a feeling. They're unconventional. They're not rigid. They're not square. Because in nature, we can't really think of anything square, right? Even rocks, even stones, they're not naturally square. When we go into rivers, pebbles are round and so forth. You know, the elements usually round shapes over time. So the earth was obviously there long before us. The earth created the very gold that we mine, the very round earth, the very that we want to access, the bamboo that we want to harvest. And so the earth and the trees, you know, they didn't need us to come into existence. We want to bear that in mind when we build, when we create. We want to be mindful that we do not contribute to its destruction, and that we harvest with reverence. What stands out is that the concept is always round, right? The round shape is always integrated, even though then inside they section it off with walls that obviously lead to a square concept. And you can just tell a lot of love goes into it, you know. There's a certain aspect of artisanry that goes into it. Even though it's so simple, you know, you can just tell love went into the creation of it. And I think that's a common denominator across traditional African architecture. You can sense that love went into it. This is the an ancient royal palace in Rwanda, and you see a similar concept again, right? We now looked at Ethiopia. We looked at Ethiopia. We looked at Cameroon, and now this is Rwanda, and these places are far apart, but as you can see, what stands out? The round shape. These are made from reed, as you can see. The reed is bundled and then staggered to create these beautiful shapes. And inside is actually pretty grandiose. You know, you can see the ceilings are fairly high, and it's just beautiful. we bear that in mind when we tend to the earth and when we build from the earth. And literally, the earth gives us everything, from the minerals to the building materials to the clay to the bamboo to the reed, literally every aspect of the houses. And again, you can understand where the people took their inspiration from, because when you look at the sand dunes, the shapes are very similar, and as a result, these tents blend in so beautifully. But it also reminds us of these huts that we looked at earlier. So we look to nature to inspire us to imitate, its divine form and shapes, and in the way we build in Sierra Leone. And we consider the land golden because of the soil. When you literally look at the soil, it looks very, very golden. This here is something as a resort, a high-end resort that's built in Indonesia from the same materials that we saw these houses built from in Africa, across Africa, mainly bamboo, reed, and rammed earth. And this is an example. This is in Indonesia, but this is an example of shapes and forms, right? You can build round things with bamboo, and that's what makes it so phenomenal. You see this phenomenal entrance. It looks like an egg, and it's built. This is a little bit behind the rammed earth technique, how it actually works, because it's a fairly simple process. Once you can even YouTube it, like do it yourself, DIY. And this is inside of this beautiful resort, and they've managed to create these beautifully layered walls. And I've stayed there and I've spoken to the staff, and they actually told me that they were all trained, and then they all began to help to build these rooms and walls, And that is an example of where a room exudes a feeling. And even though this is now high end, the same feeling is what I felt when I sleep in mud huts in Sierra Leone. So I hope that this introduction can serve as an inspiration. There is so much more to African architecture. But I hope this instills you with a feeling and a connection to the earth and the intention. I would really like to invite you to ponder on the intention, because whenever we set an intention, the energetic framework now the universe actually begins to become an architect that builds an energetic framework around our intention. So this is it from my end.
Mallence, thank you so much. That was very, very inspiring. It's so interesting that when we were 2 years ago doing the emergency housing project, I keep wanting to look at you over here, but I'm going to look at you at the screen. When we wanted to do the emergency housing project, we kept coming to the circle and creating round space. So families that had just gone through probably the most tragic event in their lives, losing everything they have to an earthquake or to a flood, the circle is a very healing shape. And the square is a way of exclusion and to separate, to isolate. But the circle allows you to hear your family members breathe. You feel them in a very different way. But for some reason, we were gravitating to that shape, and we were understanding how it allows, in a sense, it enforces a community. It forces you to feel a connection. Together. When we did the emergency housing class, we looked at indigenous architecture all over the world. And because the emergency housing project was a temporary structure, we looked at nomadic tribes in particular, but we kept coming back to the circle. And there was, there's such a wisdom that happens when you look at how cultures take care of themselves.
A circle always makes me feel like I'm in a womb. I'm held. I'm safe. I'm comforted.
I have an impression that the fluid forms and the circular forms is somehow also inspired by the landscape of Africa, especially the desert, the wavy the forms. And I do think that that is also a good way to think about the forms doesn't destruct the landscape that our inhabitants is enjoying for the decades. So building new structures is consider what's already there.
The one thing I feel about the circle is that when you're inside, you feel this sense of community. And I would like to think how the circle can be turned inside out, so it starts to also address community. Because one of the things that standing outside of a circle does is you feel separate from what's going on inside. And there are, I think there could be really wonderful ways that these circular shapes can sort of explode or turn inside out, and you start to see the same thing happen with the exterior spaces, where it starts to imply a circle and starts to create a sense of community in the space. Is a circular structure, and I think that's really a very important thing. It's not just to consider the house, but how does the house sit in the community? It's going to be very important for what we're doing here.
Yep, I agree. It's a little bit like this.
Yeah, can we just pull that up? I'm gonna turn your computer to do this. And this is something we've looked at a few times, but that's a very important image.
Let me zoom in.
Can you see it?
Let me see. Yes, I love that. Yeah.
This is
Yes. Yep.
It's Zambia.
It's this. And I also found another very interesting that I can share.
Yes, sure.
Another image is the African braids that also well, this one kind of has an architectural architectural and impression to it.
Element to it, yeah. It's an interesting way of looking at it, because it's true. It has an architectural element to that, how they stacker it and the stuff they create with these braids.
And just the sense of connectivity.
Perspective. Yeah, but it's a very interesting perspective. I never looked at it from that angle, but now that you mention it.
In so many of the structures you showed us, they were basically baskets, but very, very large baskets. You know, how that very, very strong, durable structure of weaving in a basket. And this is, you know, we're starting to see
beautiful concept.
We're starting to see architects
weaving
all over the world using, you know, like Shigeru Ban is doing a lot of architectural work around the world where the sense of the roof or the sense of the structure is woven very much like the architecture we're looking at today here with you.
Yeah, I think weaving is a super interesting concept because, as you mentioned, it's all woven. Yeah, it's inspired by probably by baskets, because all over Africa you have people weaving baskets, and weaving something together is also a very communal aspect. You know, a community is woven together. So I really like that as an integral part, as an intention. You know, to weave something beyond the actual architectural dimension, you know, where community is woven, a togetherness is woven.